Welcome back to another episode of the Emerald City Gridiron Podcast. Seahawks football simplified and amplified. And we are on day 6 of our training camp coverage where, today it was one of those days. The sun's out, tempers are flaring, there's some scuffles on the field, there's some highlight plays being made. Overall, it was just a very eventful training camp day. And, one thing I want to start with, or just really highlight, was the talk of the day was Elijah Arroyo. I think Elijah Arroyo had a fantastic training camp today. I think what Arroyo can be, coming out of Miami, his size, his physicality, his speed. Was something obviously that was highly touted by Seattle, that could be a mismatch problem for linebackers and safeties who guard him. Had kind of a up and down rookie season, only coming away with about 15 catches, a touchdown, not really getting too involved, and then he suffered an injury late in the year. So you could say it wasn't the most productive rookie year. Coming into this training camp, you could just see, and maybe it's, the new offensive coordinator, Brian Fleury, who used to be a tight end coach. Maybe it's him coming in, really being able to, coach him. Maybe it's just Elijah Arroyo putting it all together in his second year. But you've been able to see in training camp him, him show every reason on why you thought this was going to be a mismatch. His speed and size is a mismatch for linebackers and safety, and it was on full display today, whether it was one-on-one drills or it was on 11-on-11. He had big catch after big catch, and he was on different things. They were moving him around, whether it was just small dump-off things and let him go, show his speed, and get that yak, whether it was on a slant. He had a slant today where he was covered by Julian Love. Caught the ball, gave him a little extracurriculars after, let the defense know. He had some crossers. He had a deep crosser going from the right side of the field all the way to the left hash, where he had double coverage. He was covered good, but he was able to high point the ball and get the ball and come down with it, yet again, show a little extracurriculars after the play, let the defense know he was out there just doing whatever he wanted to do and at will, and show what he is capable of. And it's something you love to see out of a second year tight end. After having the rookie year that he had last year, you want him, to show his improvement and what he could do in this offense. And I think if you add that Elijah Arroyo, that speed and size to this offense, there's a lot of good things you can do. And it's not it's something that shouldn't surprise you, coming with a new OC, Brian Fleury, who has worked with George Kittle for, the last 6 years. Elijah Arroyo was definitely the talk of the town, but it wasn't just Elijah Arroyo. If we're just going to keep on the topic of tight ends, it was a very tight end centric day. Tight ends, AJ Barner, was able to have, a big play, which, got a chase down tackle from Leo, had a little stare down, he was able to, do some good things working back from his injuries. Nick Collerup had a big play today. Caught a ball, got some yak. Eric Saubert, who's something that I've been noticing more, is, more of a blocking tight end last year. Other than the phenomenal catch he was able to get into the end zone versus the Rams, he was more of a blocking tight end. I've been seeing more at training camp of him catching the ball and getting more receiving options. That's more of a wrinkle that this offense can display. He had some good catches today. Robbie Utu was with the tight ends. Robbie Utu was everywhere today that I seen. He was working with the running backs. He was with the tight ends. Definitely getting coached up. And he had a over the shoulder grab to display. He was a former tight end. I think it's not a coincidence that the tight ends are flourishing in this offense, under Brian Fleury, who was a tight end coach. but it was a very, it was a very big day for the tight ends, or just, the offense in general. The offense had a great day today. Um, I I look back on my notes, and there's the wide receiver battle that, like, not a lot of people want to talk about, because you have your JSNs, you have your Shaheed, you have your Hortons, you have your Cooper Cup, you got Bobo to a contract. So really you're down to your sixth wide receiver, and your gunner, your more special teams wide receiver, your Derek Young replacement. But that I think that battle is very intriguing. And it's been something that, has been, going back and forth. You see different, excuse me, you have different things, from, different days of the training camp, different players showing out, whether it's Foster, whether it's Rochelle, some undrafted, players. You have Ricky White, you have Emmanuel Henderson, you have Charles. All of these players are coming in and battling for that, and that's something that that I was able to see today at training camp. You have, Charles, who was back and healthy, who was, had a couple big catches, in one-on-ones. Ricky White had big catch after big catch on one-on-ones. An 11-on-11, he had a big slant that he was able to get open. Whether it was Milrow, whether it was Locke that was throwing him the ball, I wrote in my notes, I just felt like Ricky White just kept getting open. And he is stacking good days. Emmanuel Henderson had some good plays on one-on-one. He was able to get up high point, contest the ball over fellow rookie Michael Dansby, who's had a really good camp. I just think that this is a battle that is, intriguing, because it's not, intriguing to me, because Jay Harbaugh is someone who, is very important, or very big on, his special teams. He was able to really change that around and everything. And Emmanuel Henderson, who has, gunner and returner capabilities. Ricky White out of UNLV last year, who we drafted, has special teams ability. Irv Charles, who was, almost a Pro Bowler, that Seahawks just traded for, special teams ability. And then you just got interesting guys like Rashad Rochelle and Foster, who have been playing well. You have these players that are showing out at a position that, isn't being talked about. But I think it's definitely something worth watching, because you have Bobo right now already being sidelined with looks like a potential, like, hamstring injury. They're saying it's not something serious, but if someone like that goes down, you want to see what you're going to be able to get out of your depth. So I just think that continues to be a intriguing, little side note, of a camp battle that's happening. And another camp battle, that continues to look good, to look good for, the Seahawks, is the running back room. I thought Jadarian Price did some good things. He had a very, like I talked about this before, a very K9-esque things that we saw out of K9, things that he did. He had a run to the right, that looked like it was, didn't look like it was getting sniffed out. And he was able to cut back, go upfield, cut back again, and really just show off that elusiveness, that shiftiness, that vision that we seen in his limited times in Notre Dame. I think he did some really good things today at practice. He still is, he's still learning his pass pros. That's something that's still, he's still working on. But him being able to, come out the backfield and show what he's been able to do with his speed and his catching. Catching seems to be another thing that he is just, checking off the checklist, you would say, for this, for this offense that, you had question marks about. You had question marks about his catching. You had question marks about his, what he can look like as a full-time running back. And I think that he's been doing everything to show you, what he's capable of. And another player is Emmanuel Wilson. I think Emmanuel Wilson had a good day today too. He had a couple nice runs. He's showing what he could do in the pass game, which is something that, just like Jadarian Price, He wasn't very involved in the pass game. Most people just saw him as like a bruiser, someone you could put in like a Zach Charbonnet in the red zone and get those touchdowns. He continues to stack days and look impressive in a very, when you say heated, I do think this is a job that is, more, Jadarian Price, and they like what they got Helani, but I do think Emmanuel Wilson is really, pushing to be, in that discussion in those, tiers, in that top tier of running back, not just running back 3, but like, hey, I can really make some noise in this running back room. So I thought, those two running backs really did some good things. I think, offensively, it was a good day for the offense today. I saw a lot of like quick tempo things that, we know that Brian Fleury runs a very similar scheme to Clint Kubiak, both, coming back to the Kyle Shanahan scheme, and it's been reported that, like, he's going to come in, kind of keep the same regime, but add his own wrinkles thing. And I've seen a lot of, that quick tempo, that get the ball out and everything. And it was very, methodic. And even when, there were some scuffles going on, you can see, Brian Fleury on the side, keeping his composure, getting the guys off, Mike McDonald getting the guys off, getting back to what we need to do, because we need to, get these reps and everything. So offensively, they stole the show. I think Haynes filled in for Bradford. Bradford missed some time. I don't, I got to look into more on, what happened with him. I thought Haynes was able to come in and look good, which is very important for him with Seattle drafting Bo Stevens. And, him having that, having that worry about, is my job, that job security, because he's been, he's had time and time again to really solidify, to try to become a starter. And he's been permanently cemented in a backup. But, I thought he came in and did some really good things. The offensive line was able to do their thing at times. But, if we want to transition here to, speaking of the offense and going into the defense, I think, in these practices, it's obviously heavily, on making sure that, nothing happens to the quarterback. So you're not getting, your sacks, you're not tackling very much. But my God, this defensive line is amazing. And the defensive tackle room in general, there are time and time again where you would see the play get blown up. And obviously they're playing on, but you're like, hey, that's a TFL. That's a sack. There was a play, when we were talking earlier about Jadarian Price, there was a play where you can argue it would have been a TFL for Jarran Reed. As soon as the play went in, he was in the backfield. Jadarian Price was able to cut right and make something out of nothing. But you could argue, if that play was able to play through, could Jarran Reed been able to get that that TFL? I think Leonard Williams was showing off that grown man strength he likes to talk about. He constantly lived in the backfield, and I think that might have been what led to, earlier when he had a chase down tackle on A.J. Barner. I think it's just one of those things as a defensive player where you're like, hey, man, I want to do something. This is my job, is to, like, tackle and impose my will, and, they can only do so much. I thought Leonard Williams continues to look, like one of the best defensive tackles. Jarran Reed looked great. Byron Murphy, who's had a great camp. All three of those guys, just constantly lived in that backfield. There was a play with Helani where Derek White was able to get in the backfield and get him down for a TFL. Even though the offense had their day, I think the defense had some good plays. There was a blitz off the left side with Devin Witherspoon, who we saw that in the Super Bowl, what he is capable of, and time again, that man is he screams off that edge and gets to the quarterback. He was able to get a TFL. They had a screen pass to the right, and Drake Thomas was able to sniff that out. He read it all the way beautifully. A little, tackle, a little contact. Like you could tell with the scuffles that happened today. The defense wanted to do more. They were, a little over not being able to tackle and show what they could do. I think even though that the offense did their thing, I think there was some good things from the defense and what they were able to do. Even, on some one-on-one drills, I think, like a guy like Dansby, who's been, very praised. I think there were some times on one-on-one drills, that he allowed some catches, but it was the way that he fought for the ball. It wasn't like he got burnt or anything. He was there on time. Noah Igbenogany, there was a couple times where in one-on-ones and 11-on-11, he gave up a catch, but then the next play he comes in and gets a TFL, or he gets a PBU. It was a very back and forth battle, highlighted by the offense, but the defense were able to do some things. There was some scuffles, a little back and forth, a little pushing, a little, WWE things, some slamming on the ground or whatever, tempers flying. It's hot out there. There was some back and forth, but I think there was a lot of positive things to come away from here. I think there was a guy, or in red zone drills specifically, if we want to highlight some positives, a guy like Gaines in the Jalen Gaines in the red zone drills. He had multiple run stops, and that's what you like to see out of a second-year player, undrafted player, was with Seahawks last year. Small things like that you like to see. But overall, I think, my thoughts were, I think if we're highlighting players, I think Elijah Arroyo had a great day. I think Ricky White did a lot of good things. I think Jadarian Price did some good things. I think the defensive tackles had a good day. And I think they continue to look impressive. But that's all for my coverage. It's all and everything. I will be back in the VMAC on the 7th and at Football Fest on 8th. So make sure to like and subscribe for more training camp coverage. It is the best way to help the channel grow. And I will see you next time. Go Hawks.